We've decided to put together this very quick bonus episode. We usually do one episode a week, but this is a bonus episode this week because Vishnu and I thought that drones is something everyone's talking about, Vishnu.
Yeah.
The Made in India drone story in Operation Sindoor is probably one of the biggest headlines in this operation.
Can actually go to a particular area by day or by night. It then goes into a terminal dive, hits that target, knocks it out, and that's when it gets destroyed as well. It's a suicide weapon.
My mind is racing to think what kind of targets this must have hit.
Is that warfare in the subcontinent has changed. It's changed completely. The era of drone warfare, which we've seen in other parts of the world, we've seen it in West Asia, we've certainly seen it in Russia, Ukraine, is now over here.
We both saw a few things which we may be able to touch upon a little bit because I know there are sensitivities.
We're going to get in trouble with the question that's coming.
So by popular demand and because our viewers are in the Operation Sindoor atmosphere right now, we've decided to put together this very quick bonus episode. We usually do one episode a week, but this is a bonus episode this week because Vishnu and I thought that drones is something everyone's talking about, Vishnu.
Yeah.
In our first episode, we talked quite a bit about drones, but clearly people haven't had enough. And you and I have also been able to collect a lot more information. And it was much bigger than we initially imagined. The Made in India drone story in Operation Sindoor is probably one of the biggest headlines in this operation, Vishnu. Taking from what we spoke about in the last episode, and I'll read out the list. I'm getting this ever-expanding list of Indian drones of all kinds that were used either kinetically or in support roles or flying in POK or Pakistani airspace, keeping eyes on targets and things like that. What are you hearing?
I think what the larger sense I have in terms of this entire operation is that warfare in the subcontinent has changed. It's changed completely. The era of drone warfare, which we've seen in other parts of the world, we've seen it in West Asia, we've certainly seen it in Russia, Ukraine, is now over here. And there is a sense that this is going to be the way forward. It's going to be increasingly AI-enabled, machine learning-enabled, all sorts of drones, some as small as the palm of your hand, some which are absolutely gigantic, which are going to dominate the warfare space, the war space as it were. They'll all be unmanned. They may be operating in conjunction with manned platforms. But what we've seen this time around was absolutely huge because when you look at the Pakistani offensive on the first couple of days, they put in up to 400 odd drones right from the Siachen Glacier to Bhuj in Gujarat.
The entire frontier.
And what they were trying to do over there is very interesting, and it's something that we need to be alert to, and we were, fortunately. They were probing our air defenses. So they were sending in drones. Many of these were unarmed. Many of these were reconnaissance drones. Many of these, had they been engaged, would have let Pakistan know the rough proximity, the location of our surface-to-air missile units, our air defense units, which is why our planners had to stay super smart. And they had to have the ability of discriminating between the drones which the Pakistanis sent in. Were they larger drones which were equipped with bombs or bomblets and missiles, or were they really small drones which were fulfilling a tactical sort of mission?
Designed to trigger a response.
Because as we discussed last time around, you don't fire a $2 million round, a missile, surface-to-air missile, against a drone which costs less than $1,000 odd. You just don't. Why? Because you don't have that many surface-to-air missiles of any class. Nobody does. Which is why what we saw from Pakistan was, in terms of numbers and volumes, was fairly large. India did the same, but obviously using different technology, meeting different military requirements as well. We had swarm drones which were used. We had drones which went in, small ones, for reconnaissance missions. We presumably had larger ones for reconnaissance missions, and also any number of suicide drones that went in.
Loitering munitions,
Loitering munitions. And I think let's talk just by, and identify and tell our viewers what a loitering munition is. These are suicide weapons. They're called suicide drones. Now, we've got something called the Sky Striker. We've got something called the Harpy, and we've got something called the Aroor. There are other ones as well. There are some really good companies manufacturing all of this. The drones
there were some fully Indian ones also.
Yeah, the drones which I identified are now being manufactured by the Adanis in India. And so all of these are interesting. Then there's also the TASL ALS, which is a Tata Advanced Systems Limited drone, long-range precision strikes. So basically what a loitering drone does is, depending on its range, it can actually go to a particular area by day or by night. It can be over an area for, let's say, an hour or so, again depending on the range that it has. And then once it identifies a target using its electro-optical sensors or other sensors on board, it then goes into a terminal dive, hits that target, knocks it out, and that's where it gets destroyed as well. It's a suicide weapon. This can be used to eliminate specific terrorists, not just buildings or structures, which they're also
Precision
used.
strikes,
But this is as precise as it gets. I mean, the Sky Striker, which we spoke about earlier on, it has an electric drive, a fairly robust range, extremely sophisticated, very, very quiet. It loiters over an area, gets into that suicide mode, and takes out targets. So that's just one type of drone which was sort of used by both sides, in fact, but certainly by India.
So, Vishnu, and we both know because we've interacted with many of these amazing companies, we know their founders as well. There are over 300 Indian drone startups of various sizes right now. Many of them have supply contracts with the Indian Armed Forces already, doing cutting edge research work. And one of the most amazing things that you and I both learned before this episode was how many of those drones, which we've so far only seen in Aero India or in brochures or in snazzy videos.
We're going to get in trouble with the question that's coming.
These were in the mix. No, we have the permission to say this on CTRL ALT Defence because we say it with responsibility. We're not going to identify where they were used, how they were used, in what form they were used, but we can confirm that they were there. They were there in the battlefield.
They were there right in the battlefield, right on the front line,
and we both
technology was being proven.
We both saw a few things which we may be able to touch upon a little bit because I know there are sensitivities. But let me just name some of those drones, and then we'll go through one of them. And these are amazing companies. Idea Forge, which you mentioned, has been a pioneering company for drones. I know for a fact that their Netra and Switch surveillance drones were conducting surveillance operations in POK and Pakistan. There were open source intelligence videos of people in Pakistan taking videos of the Netra drone making its way across the battlefield. The Jonet JM1 is a loitering munition.
And the company is Jonet Technologies
Jonet
India.
Technologies, they've recently supplied to the army. They had their loitering munition, the one that you just described, hitting, I hear they were hitting launch pads in POK. New Space, company that we know very well,
Swarm drones.
Swarm drones, as well as tactical attack drones called the Beluga and the Nimbus. And again, I received permission from within the forces to take some of these names. The Beluga and the Nimbus were conducting swarm and attack operations on small targets within POK, terror targets and otherwise. Very important loitering munition that you mentioned just now, Vishnu, is called the ALS 250, which is Tata Advanced Systems Limited, fully Indian, long-range munition, loitering munition, which has a range of about 250 kilometers.
Which is very significmind for a relatively small weapon,
So, that's crazy. That can hit really, really deep inside. I'm just, my mind is racing to think what kind of targets this must have hit.
It hit Pakistani air defense radars possibly.
So we've
including the one in Lahore, who knows?
We saw a video,
That's
Vishnu,
a possibility.
I think of the Harop or the Harpi
It could have been the
targets.
Harop as well, which actually did that. But it could easily have been the TASL ALS 250. We don't really know.
We don't really know. But
to me, it seemed to be a Harop. But be that as it may, there were targets in Lahore.
I think it's safe to say that many of these drones were used differently, but it's very clear that these drones did conduct some kinetic operations. Another company that even the government had named in one of their documents, IG Drones, they've got vertical takeoff and landing drones. They've got a first-person video camera kind of drone that was apparently also in the mix for some tactical surveillance operations. There's a company called Zappa, which has an Ajit series of tactical drones.
That's a tactical UAV.
That were also used, for certain operations. And there are any number of other companies. If I've missed any of them, we'll certainly name them in another episode. But these were this is what, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I've named 9 drones.
I've got about a number which is similar.
Which is both loitering munitions, ones that are able to drop bombs, like the Nimbus and the Beluga, swarm drones and surveillance drones. All of these guaranteed are made right here in India. The Sky Striker is an Israeli drone that's manufactured in India, but the ones we've named are all Indian design
these are all
Indian-made drones.
And this is the future. And
Yeah.
given the number of drones which were utilized, I think it's absolutely incumbent on the government to start procuring these by the thousands.
Yeah.
These are not as expensive as larger conventional weapon systems, which is why they are being used as extensively as they are in Russia and Ukraine. And in having covered the Ukraine war, I mean, I've been there on the ground 3 times on 2 occasions, actively covering the conflict itself, where I got to hear a great deal about the use of drones and the evolving use of drone technology. I think the broader point is that all of these systems fill a certain requirement. But I will tell you that in as much as these drones are being used, both India and Pakistan realize that they are vulnerable. They're vulnerable to being jammed. They're vulnerable to soft kill, anti-drone guns, anti-drone nets, all sorts of things. It depends on how high they are flying, the proximity. And there are also certain classes of drones which weren't used. So for example, as we know it, first-person view drones to take out infantry targets, like what we've seen on any number of videos in the Russia-Ukraine war, may not have been used over here. But what we've seen in the Russia-Ukraine war is absolutely crazy, where you've got daytime video of little drones following a soldier around, and then with the soldier having no place to escape, and then hitting that soldier, exploding and killing him. That sort of warfare perhaps did not take place this time around, but the technology certainly exists.
Yeah.
But where manufacturers of drones in India will need to adapt further, and this is true of any drone manufacturer, is the use of jamming actively by the enemy, which means you're going to have to find a way around that. You're going to have to ensure that you have a more reliable way of communicating with your drone. In the case of drones which have a very limited range, you can use fiber, a direct line which controls the drone, so you're bypassing any form of jamming which takes place. Those systems may also have been used. But I think when it comes to the drone in surveillance operations and also offensive operations, taking out tanks, taking out semi-hard structures, it's absolutely huge. Think about what happened, Shiv, to the tank, which has been a mainstay of warfare since the First World War.
And you saw some at the line of control.
Yeah, and I saw drones along with them because surveillance was being provided by drones for all sorts of formations, including tank formations. In fact, I'm not saying anything controversial or a secret here because they displayed it for us. So there's a drone here and there's a tank right next to it. But be that as it may, the point is that the tank, which has been a mainstay of warfare since the First World War, is now decidedly vulnerable. You've got cope cages mounted on tanks, including on our tanks and infantry combat vehicles as well. Why? Because people know that you could have small drones which linger on top and then drop onto the top of a tank where the armor is the weakest and knock out. So think about it, a tank which is extremely expensive, relatively speaking, knocked out by something which costs about $1,000, $1,500 drone, right? But you can't get rid of the tank. It fulfills a different sort of requirement. But the nature of the threat that we now have is something that we have to keep in mind. So that's something that's certainly something that needs to be looked at.
Yeah. So apart from the drones themselves, what pleased me inordinately to hear from many of these companies is something that goes so much against how we understand the Indian military and the bureaucracy and the government and the way sarkari systems work, is that many of these companies, Vishnu, small specialized team from these companies, and I'm not going to take any of these companies' individual names. It could be some of them, it could be all of them, it could be none of them. They were actually summoned for what can only be described as operational duties.
Absolutely. They were embedded into the front line,
with the
any
military,
number of companies.
Including drones which have not even been contracted yet, which are under trial, were actually used. Tell us about that. That's incredible to me.
Well, I'm not sure how much we can actually say about that, other than the fact that it probably did happen.
Here's what we can say. I'll tell you, here's what we can say. Private sector companies in small teams, in places where they were required, were summoned, given assignments by the army. Like you said, they were embedded with our forces and were conducting live surveillance and kinetic operations with their products. That is incredible to me.
Yeah. And imagine the learning that they would have gained, because nothing really prepares you for the real thing. So they would have seen the effectiveness of their drone systems. They would understand how to adapt, because the ability to adapt has been critical in drone warfare. Again, in the initial phases of the Russia-Ukraine war, the Russian forces were being hammered by Ukrainian forces.
Yeah.
They were losing tanks at a rate in which the entire war would have been unsustainable for them. They had no real means of knocking down Ukrainian drones. But then they adapted and they developed their own drones. And what they were able to do in countering Ukrainian drones using fairly ingenious solutions of their own, has changed that the war and the way it was going considerably.
Yeah.
The drone war is more or less, even now, if still somewhat tilted in favor of the Ukrainians.
Yeah.
What we are now seeing in that war is remarkable, because we've got drone interceptors. So you've got small drones deployed by the Ukrainians, in certain cases even with guns, which actually spot other drones in the air, enemy drones, and then proceed to either ram them or even knock them down with guns or shoot them down with guns. That is the level in which, in just a few years, we've seen drone technology evolve. So we are not there at that level of cutting edge drone warfare. But the fact that we've got all of this in-house, we've got companies doing this work who have got immense amounts of data now, means that they're going to come back with better solutions so that we are better armed and equipped for the future. This is, remember, at sea level that we deployed these drones. And I think this is an important point. When we start deploying drones, all sorts, at ultra high altitude places, in the event of something happening with China, then the drones themselves need to be extremely capable. Whether in terms of their battery packs, whether in terms of their range, whether in terms of their ability to hover at height or to carry out potential attacks at heights, or even basic surveillance missions. So that requires a skill set and a capability which these companies would also be looking at. Because they aren't just building for the desert, they're also building for the mountain.
This reminds me of a company called Rafe M-Fiber, which has supplied heavy-duty logistics drones to the army in Ladakh. That's actually taken over some of the helicopter duties in the high-altitude posts. But the other question, and something you said reminded me of this, Vishnu, which is that the wealth of data that would have come into all of these companies, at one level, this has validated the government's decision to invest in a so-called drone ecosystem. That stands validated for sure, even with the preliminary information coming in. Number two, like you said, this huge amount of data is probably going to trigger a next wave of tech. There was already great tech happening by many of these companies. Now they've got real operational inputs to refine these systems and get them going very fast. Third, probably most importantly, we have to admit, no matter what, we're in a country where decisions take a while. This is probably the biggest trigger and validation in terms of, hey, we need drones, and our companies are able to make them really, really well.
No, look, this could be a massive win-win for atmanirbharta. It doesn't need to be just a slogan, because in terms of the technology, the companies, the enthusiasm, it's all there on the ground. In terms of the ecosystem, it basically means those who can actually manufacture, components, and that's something which obviously exists in-house as well. What we do need to understand is that the future is already over here. 50 years from now, Shiv, when you will still be a young man and I will not potentially be around, you will see the human involvement in warfare decreasing very, very substantially. I mean, we are already in a situation where you're looking at unmanned fighters in the air, right? You're looking at manned-unmanned teaming. In fact, we should talk about that concept as well. Separate episode
for sure.
But we'll touch upon that over here, because now in terms of air warfare, what we are actually seeing, and we are sort of working on that with the Ghatak drone and other drone systems, even indigenously, is manned fighters potentially collaborating through teaming with unmanned fighters, where a fighter with human personnel on board is data linked to a separate weapon system, which is called a loyal wingman, right? Which is then deployed for specific missions, whether in the air or hitting targets on the ground or wherever else it may be. So
keeping the human away and letting the...
This is already being operationalized. The Russians have got something called the Okhotnik, I think. It works with the Su-57. The Americans have got their own systems in place, and
where they've got General Atomics and Aroor competing.
And we've got something as well, which is coming up. And Hal is looking and working at
the CAT system.
The CAT system, the man-unmanned teaming system. So that's something that's important. Ghatak is something slightly different, which I referred to earlier on. But that's very much the future. And so the basic point I'm making is that the future is here. Warfare is changing. It's not going to be the way we've seen it so long. And so any investment in drone technology, which providentially is by and large cheaper than conventional weapon systems, that's something everybody knows. The Pakistanis would be buying their own. That's where we need to go.
But is that going to happen is my question, Vishnu.
It has to happen. It's not a choice.
And the reason I'm saying this is because as a military culture for so long, we have harped so much on on manned fighters, the Tejas, so what the MRFA is going to be, whole new episode for that as well, which we will get into, and I have a feeling we'll have to do 10 episodes on that, but never mind.
Could end up being our favorite one.
It might end up being our favorite one, but how is our strategic culture or our combat culture going to shift to acknowledging that Sindoor has been a huge lesson in terms of that paradigmatic shift towards drone warfare?
Can I just suggest it's already I think it's already happened. I think the fact that we saw the number of drones that Pakistan came in with, and the fact that we countered them with our own drones, meant that we were alert to the possibility that, look, this is something that's going to happen. We need to have a plan in place, which is why we had this massive Indian drone enablement. Indian drones were phenomenally successful. I'm not just necessarily made in India drones, but drones deployed by the Indian Armed Forces. The fact that we did take out particular sites, whether they were radar sites, air defense sites, what have you, certainly, and remember that we talk about the big air bases which were struck, or the terror training centers, but the large number of operations against terror bases were done by the Indian Army just across the line of control, in many cases using these drones.
Correct.
So it's already there for us now. This is the way warfare is going to be, and that technology is going to constantly improve. And you need to work on your defenses as well. We did a great job in defending against drones using low-cost, low-tech solutions. I spent a couple of days on the IB and the line of on the line of control in the greater Jammu area, as it were, Rajouri, Akhnur, Poonch, where I saw how low-cost solutions, including that L-70 gun, you know, Shiv, which we were talking about in episode 1.
Oh, I heard those everywhere.
and so, Shiv, in fact, I must talk about this. I saw that, and it's strange that I haven't discussed this, and this is the first time I'm talking to you about it. What I did see, and we even spoke to operators of those L-70 guns. These are ACAC guns. They've been used in service for decades right now. They've been digitalized. They've been integrated with the Akash system of the Indian Army, which is a node which sort of enables our war planners to know exactly what's happening in the air environment. There are tactical radars as well, which are sort of deployed and fitted along with that setup. So the L-70 can actually be slaved in the direction of targets on the basis of what a particular fire control radar is picking up. So it's not just a manual.
So it has a digital picture.
And you start firing. You can still do that, obviously, but at night time you can actually automatically move the weapon in a particular direction, since its targeting is slaved as well with a particular radar system. That's something that we've seen very, very closely.
It's incredible, and in many of the places that we visited, across Kashmir, we did see the L-70, the ZU-23 guns, and many other different kinds of guns. We saw a few Shilka units here and there as well. That, as you and I both reported, actually took care of most of those incoming drones from Pakistan. It weren't the sophisticated missiles, as it were. But talk a little bit about our anti-drone measures. This comparison is going to be made about how all of the drones that came in from the other side were taken care of, like they were just swatted from the sky. Was it that simple? How did India's anti-drone measures do so well?
India's anti-drone measures were a mix of high-tech and low-tech solutions. We haven't really spoken about the the soft kill solutions which were actually used. In many cases, these are called anti-drone guns, which actually jam the communication systems or the guidance systems of incoming drones. They were used quite effectively. I would suggest that they may well have been used by both sides. Number one. Number two, we used what we've already discussed, the L-70 guns. We've used old surface-to-air missiles which had reached the end of their surface life. So the R-73 missile, the R-27 in certain cases, put on the summer sort of system, which is a jugaad solution of the Indian
which
Air Force.
We spoke about in episode 1.
In episode 1, fantastic weapon system, old Russian Pechora surface-to-air missile systems taking out aircraft or potentially taking out aircraft, and more high-value drones as well. So it all came together, but the ability to discern the nature of the threat, leaving certain classes of drones, because the system would otherwise have been overwhelmed if you fired against everything, and it's not even possible to fire against everything. I, again, being on the line of control, speaking to air defense gunners and saying, did you actually take out drones, or do you think you took out drones? And they said, no, absolutely we did. How do you know that? So here's the debris.
Wreckage everywhere.
Here's the wreckage everywhere. I said, that you did that? He said, yeah, we think we did that because we found it in the next field. Right? So it was all over the place. I was up on the line of control at an altitude of more than 10,000 feet, where I met operators or army soldiers using the IGLA surface-to-air missile, which is a shoulder-mounted surface-to-air missile. I asked the same thing. I said that, did you knock out anything? He said, absolutely we did. So I said that, do you have the wreckage? He says, no. So I said, how come you don't have the wreckage? So he said that, you are just a few meters away from the line of control.
Correct.
So we shot it down on that side, and it's in the Pakistani base in front of you somewhere. Or a Pakistani area in front of you. So these are optimal solutions. They've been upgraded significantly. You've got a very robust range for night vision. I can't tell you that range right now, but the fact that you've got your shoulder-mounted surface-to-air missile SA-18 IGLA operators being able to train their sights onto a target, be able to spot it, then get a tone, right, and then launch their missile and then knock it out of the sky. Very effective against drones. And we've got a substantial reserve of IGLA missiles. So that's something which is important and which was used extensively.
I was thinking that on this episode we might talk about the more higher performance, larger drones, but then it occurred to me that that's a completely separate domain which we will dedicate yet another. Look at our list of episodes is just writing itself, which is very convenient. But as we bring this episode to a close, one final question.
And I thought that we wouldn't have enough to talk about.
We're never going to run out of things to talk about. And this is Operation Sindoor season, of course. But final question, Vishnu, is that the companies that make all these drones and the DRDO itself, HAL, which has its own drone department making drones, like you mentioned just now. What is that next step going to be with the learnings from Operation Sindoor? Very broadly, I'm thinking, obviously, code, software, range is going to be another aspect.
Anti-jamming.
Armaments and survivability to electronic warfare and jamming.
I would put that jamming as number one.
Yeah.
Because you need to have, jam resistant or if possibly jam proof drones going through.
Key.
And that is a game of frequencies, of radar frequencies, of jamming frequencies, of comms, of data links, all of that stuff. And all of that has to be made stronger and more resilient to enable these drones to actually, if these drones go through, they'll hit their target. The thing is that it's these jamming measures which it's the difference between success and failure. Look at what we actually did when our strikes went in to hit the Pakistani air bases. We jammed out frontline Pakistani systems so our missiles could go through. In the same way, we have to ensure that our own drones, right, are not jammed, or even if they are able to discern the nature of the threat and go through.
It's going to be incredible, whether it is resistance to jamming. All the building blocks of these drones exist, and they've been proven, I think, in this combat, Vishnu, in terms of what they can do, what they're capable of doing in contested environments. Huge amount of data in terms of how they can be better jam resistant, longer range, more lethal, the ability to carry bigger warheads, etc., flexibility. I'm sure those things are going to happen. But one final point I'd like to make before we end this episode is it's also really heartening to see that it's not just the big companies. Obviously Adani's, Tatas are there. You've got Alpha Design and Zen and some of the others. Bharat Forge as well is getting into this space. But the large number of small companies that are doing
That's
this.
just fantastic. You know, you've got students working on this.
Students just
Yeah.
out of IITs.
Yeah.
Idea Forge used to be an IIT incubation project.
Good. You should see the average age
Yeah.
of their leadership. It's incredible.
Is
Yeah.
truly incredible. So, you know, just thinking out of the top of my head, I'm just wondering whether this will go some distance in reversing a bit of the brain drain that we keep whining about and complaining about in this country, because
I think
there's so much work to be done in this drone aerospace field.
I think that's very much the future. One of the areas which has a real future when it comes to our future, when it comes to our defense planning. These systems, and again, as we said a little while earlier on, the information, the data which they've picked up, the fact that you've got any number of these companies potentially having been embedded with the Indian Armed Forces, getting a sense firsthand about what it's all about, the nature of the Pakistani defenses, it's all something that they're going to work with to try and sort out for the future.
Yeah, there's a huge hill to climb, both in terms of operations, also in terms of the export market. Nobody is going to sit here and saying, Vishnu and I are, we've covered this space for a long time, so we're not going to say, oh, everything's going to change overnight and it's going to be beautiful sunshine tomorrow for this industry. But there is a real opportunity here. Remember, Chinese companies, Korean companies, they've dominated the drone space for a very long time. I'm talking about the civilian drone space for a very long time. Now we're talking about military drones as well. Could this be a tipping point in some ways for the Indian drone ecosystem that has been invested in and over 4 days spectacularly validated? We'll be keeping a very close eye on this, Vishnu. This has been illuminating both for me and for all of our viewers, and that's what I really love about Control Alt Defence. Thanks so much for watching.
Thank you.